There's a particular kind of quiet you can only find deep in the wilderness, miles from any road. It's not an absence of sound, it's a presence. The whisper of wind through ancient pines, the scuttling of some unseen creature in the undergrowth, the steady rhythmic beat of your own heart. It's a silence that feels alive. But for a man named Liam, that living silence would become a source of profound, mind-shattering terror. He went into the Appalachian Mountains seeking solitude. He found something else waiting for him, something that had been listening for a very long time. Liam considered himself a veteran of the wild. At 34, he'd been hiking since he was a teenager, and the Appalachian Trail was his cathedral. He knew its moods, its dangers, and its deceptive beauty. He'd seen black bears, weathered freak lightning storms, and navigated by the stars when his GPS failed. He was competent, prepared, and above all, respected the mountains. This trip was different, though. It wasn't about conquering a peak or setting a personal mileage record. It was an escape. A brutal quarter at his engineering firm had left him feeling hollowed out, a ghost in his own life. He needed to disconnect, to feel the simple, honest ache in his muscles and the clean, cold air in his lungs. He needed the silence. He chose a less trafficked spur of the trail in the Nantahala National Forest of North Carolina, a winding path that snaked through some of the oldest parts of the range. For the first day, it was everything he'd hoped for. The world of deadlines and spreadsheets dissolved with every step. The air smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves. Sunlight filtered through the dense canopy in shifting, ethereal beams. He felt his shoulders, perpetually tensed, finally begin to drop. He made camp by a gurgling creek, cooked a simple meal over his small stove, and fell asleep to the symphony of the forest. The second day began just as peacefully. He was making good time, the trail unfolding before him in a ribbon of packed earth and stone. It was around mid-morning when he saw the first thing that was off. On a large moss-covered log that lay across a small clearing, something caught his eye. It was a single river stone, about the size of his palm. It was perfectly smooth, black, and had a dull sheen, as if it had been polished. What was strange was its placement and condition. It sat dead center on the log, perfectly balanced, and while everything around it, the log, the moss, the surrounding leaves, was slick with morning dew, the stone was bone dry. Liam stopped, tilting his head. It looked deliberate, unnatural, like a piece in a game of Go left on a board in the middle of nowhere. He scanned the trees, a primal instinct kicking in. He saw nothing but the dense, indifferent green of the forest. He dismissed it. Maybe another hiker left it as a weird trail marker, or maybe a bird dropped it. The explanation didn't matter. He took a picture of it with his phone. It was oddly photographic, and moved on, the strange little mystery already fading from his mind. About an hour later, he stopped for a water break, leaning his pack against a towering hemlock. As the sound of his own movements ceased, the forest's true soundscape returned. The drone of insects, the distant call of a crow, the rustle of a squirrel, and something else. Crunch? It was a single, distinct sound. The sound of a footstep on dry leaves about 20 or 30 yards behind him on the trail. His head snapped up. His senses, already heightened by the wild, went on full alert. He stood motionless, listening. For a full minute, there was nothing but the wind. A deer, he told himself, or a bear. I'd startled it, and now it was frozen, just like me. He slowly turned his head, scanning the trail he'd just walked. He saw only the dappled light and the empty path winding back into the trees. He took a slow, deliberate step forward. Crunch. The sound came again, perfectly in sync with his own footfall, but delayed by a second. It was an echo. But it wasn't an echo. The acoustics were wrong. An echo would be faint, distorted. This was crisp, clear, and sounded exactly like his own heavy hiking boot pressing down on the forest floor. A cold knot formed in his stomach. This wasn't an animal. Animals don't mimic. He started walking again, his pace steady, his ears straining. Step, crunch. Step, crunch. Every single time his right foot landed, a moment later, the sound was repeated behind him. It was a perfect, chilling imitation. He sped up, his heart beginning to hammer against his ribs. The footsteps behind him sped up, maintaining the exact same distance, the exact same rhythm. It was like being shadowed by a phantom that was reenacting his every move. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice sounding thin and weak in the vastness. The only answer was the whisper of the wind. And silence. The footsteps had stopped the instant he had. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, sweat trickling down his back despite the cool mountain air. This was a game. Someone was messing with me. A local prankster, another hiker with a twisted sense of humor. The thought was somehow more unsettling than a wild animal. The malice felt personal. He decided to test it. He took 3 quick, light steps, like a shuffle. Shuffle, shuffle, shuffle. The echo came back, a perfect copy. He stomped his foot hard. Stomp.
A wave of pure, primal fear washed over him. He grabbed his trekking poles, his knuckles white. "This isn't funny," he yelled, spinning around to face the empty trail. "I know you're there. Show yourself." The forest offered no reply. The game had apparently paused. He waited, his body thrumming with adrenaline, but the sound didn't return. Shaking, he forced himself to keep moving. He had to make it to the next shelter, a 3-sided lean-to marked on his map about 5 miles ahead. The thought of being caught out in the open after dark was now unbearable. For the next hour, there was only silence, but it was a new kind of silence. It was heavy, expectant. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of panic through him. He felt watched. The feeling was so intense, it was like a physical pressure on the back of his neck. He came to a small, rocky outcrop that offered a wider view of the surrounding hills. As he navigated the rocks, he noticed another anomaly, a small stack of stones, a cairn. But it wasn't a standard trail marker. It was a delicate, impossible structure. 3 flat stones, each one progressively smaller, were balanced perfectly on their edges, creating a fragile skeletal arch. It was a work of art, a testament to patience, and it was utterly out of place. He stared at it, a cold dread seeping into his bones. It felt like the same hand that had placed the polished river stone, a calling card. Acting on a sudden, angry impulse, he kicked it over. The stones clattered to the ground. The act of destruction gave him a fleeting sense of control. He scrambled down the other side of the outcrop and hurried on, not looking back. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The beauty was lost on him. As the shadows deepened, the forest transformed from a place of life into a labyrinth of menacing shapes. And then the sound returned. It wasn't the footsteps. It was a soft snap. A twig breaking under a heavy weight. It came from his right, deep in the woods, off the trail. He froze, his flashlight beam cutting a nervous swath through the gloom. He was being flanked. Then to his left, another sound. A slow, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled through the undergrowth. He was in the middle. The mimicry had been a game, a way to terrorize him. This was different. This was tactical. The footsteps had been behind him, on his path. These sounds were in the wilderness, in the dark, all around him. He was being herded, pushed. The feeling was no longer of being followed, it was of being hunted. Panic, cold and absolute, finally broke him. He abandoned all pretense of bravery and ran. He didn't care about the trail anymore. He just ran, crashing through bushes, stumbling over roots, his pack bouncing painfully on his back. His lungs burned. Branches whipped at his face, leaving stinging cuts. Behind him, he could hear them keeping pace. The snapping on his right, the dragging on his left. They weren't rushing. They didn't need to. They were just there, two unseen escorts on his journey into madness. He doesn't know how long he ran. Time seemed to warp and stretch. He saw the shelter at the last possible second, a dark, angular shape against the slightly less dark sky. With a final, desperate burst of energy, he burst into the clearing and threw himself inside the three-sided structure. He scrambled to the back wall, pulling his pack in front of him like a shield, and pointed his flashlight at the opening, his hand shaking so badly the beam danced like a frantic spirit. He waited. His breath came in ragged, sobbing gasps. The woods were utterly silent again. The crickets, the insects, the wind, everything had gone quiet, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. And then he heard it. A soft, inquisitive tap, tap, tap on the wooden roof of the shelter. He choked back a scream. Something was on the roof. It was light, almost delicate. He aimed his flashlight up, but the beam just reflected off the weathered planks. Scrape? A long, slow scratching sound, like a single, sharp fingernail being dragged across the wood from one end of the roof to the other. Liam squeezed his eyes shut. Just, please go away, he whispered, the words barely audible. From the opening of the shelter, just at the edge of his wavering light, a stone clattered onto the ground. He slowly lowered the beam. It was a river stone, smooth, black, and perfectly dry. It was identical to the one he'd seen that morning. A message. We are here. He spent the night huddled in the corner, his flashlight beam fixed on that stone, not daring to let the battery die. The sounds continued sporadically. The light tapping on the roof, the occasional soft whisper just outside that sounded like his name being carried on the wind. He didn't sleep. He didn't move. He just waited for the sun. When the first gray light of dawn finally filtered through the trees, the sounds had long since stopped. The forest was waking up, the birds beginning their morning chorus as if nothing had happened. The riverstone was still there. Liam didn't pack carefully. He stuffed his sleeping bag into his pack, not even bothering to roll it. He left his cooking gear. He took only his water and the last of his energy bars. He didn't go back to the trail. He bushwhacked, heading straight downhill in what he hoped was the direction of the nearest road, a solid 10 miles away. He didn't look back, not once. He stumbled out of the woods onto a gravel fire road 6 hours later, scratched, bruised, and mentally shattered. A park ranger found him an hour after that, and he mumbled a story about a bear destroying his camp. He knew how the truth would sound. Liam never hiked alone again. He sold most of his gear. Sometimes, late at night when his house is quiet, he thinks he can hear it. A soft crunch from another room, a faint scratching on the window pane. He knows it's just his mind playing tricks on him, but he also knows that the Appalachian Mountains are ancient. And they hold secrets older than any human understanding. And some secrets, once they know your name, will follow you home. They exist in the silence between your own steps.
The bayous of Louisiana are a world unto themselves, a place where the water and the land are in a constant, murky embrace. It's a landscape of breathtaking beauty and profound mystery, steeped in folklore and ghost stories. They say the bayou keeps its secrets well. They say there are things that live in the deep, dark water, things that predate the cities and the roads. A young couple, Chloe and Ben, went looking for an adventure off the grid. They were about to learn that when the bayou sings to you, you should never, ever sing back. Chloe was the romantic, the one who believed in the magic of the world.
Ben was the pragmatist, the geologist who saw the world in layers of rock and sediment. They were a perfect balance. For their anniversary, Chloe had convinced Ben to go on an authentic Louisiana camping trip. No designated campsites with RV hookups and noisy neighbors. She wanted the real deal. Deep in the Atchafalaya Basin, just them, their canoe, and the ghosts of the swamp. Ben had agreed, mostly to humor her, packing a top-of-the-line GPS and 2 high-powered flashlights for the ghosts, he joked. They paddled for hours, leaving the boat launch far behind. The civilized world melted away, replaced by a labyrinth of cypress trees draped in Spanish moss that swayed like the tattered robes of ancient kings. The water was like black glass, reflecting the oppressive humidity of the sky. Cypress knees, looking like skeletal fingers, clawed their way out of the murky depths. The air was thick as wet velvet, alive with the drone of cicadas and the plop of unseen things slipping into the water. It was beautiful and deeply intimidating. They found a perfect spot, a small, solid island of land, maybe half an acre, raised a few feet above the waterline. It was crowned with a cluster of gnarled oak trees. They set up their tent, built a small, careful campfire, and watched as the sun dissolved into the horizon, smearing the sky with shades of bruised purple and blood orange. The swamp came alive with a new chorus of sounds, the deep guttural thrum of bullfrogs, the high-pitched shriek of a night heron. The first night was idyllic. They told stories, drank a little whiskey, and felt like the only 2 people on Earth. But the second night, something changed. The fire was dying down to glowing embers when Chloe first heard it. It was faint, carried on the humid breeze, a soft, melodic humming. It was a simple, repetitive tune, a lullaby. It sounded like a woman's voice, but it was distant, ethereal. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, her head cocked. Ben stopped poking the fire. He listened, his brow furrowed. "Yeah. Weird. A bird?" "No bird sings like that," Chloe said, a shiver tracing its way down her spine. The melody was hauntingly familiar, but she couldn't place it. It rose and fell with a sorrowful cadence, a song of loss that seemed to emanate from the very water itself. "It sounds like a person." The humming continued, a constant, low thrum beneath the other noises of the night. It seemed to be coming from deeper in the swamp, to the north of their little island. Ben, ever the skeptic, was intrigued. Probably just some folks fishing late and playing music on their phone. "Out here? This far in?" Chloe wasn't convinced. The sound was too organic, too pure. It didn't sound like it was coming from a speaker. The curiosity, however, began to gnaw at them both. After another 10 minutes of the incessant, mournful tune, Ben stood up. "All right, I can't just sit here. Let's go see. We'll take the canoe, just paddle a little ways, probably nothing." Chloe felt a spike of fear, a primal warning screaming at her not to leave the relative safety of their fire. But her curiosity and her reluctance to seem cowardly won out. "Okay, but we don't go far." They grabbed their most powerful flashlights, slipped on their boots, and slid their canoe into the black water. The world immediately felt different. On the island, they were observers. In the canoe, they were participants, vulnerable, floating on a surface that concealed God knows what.
Ben paddled slowly, his strokes silent and practiced. Chloe sat in the bow, her flashlight beam cutting a sharp, white cone through the oppressive darkness. The lullaby was their guide. It seemed to get louder as they navigated through a narrow channel between 2 massive cypress trees. Then it would fade, as if moving away from them. "It's like it's playing with us," Chloe whispered, her voice tight. "Sound does weird things over water," Ben replied, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. The air here felt colder, heavier. The cacophony of the swamp had faded away. The frogs were silent. The insects had stopped their droning. The only sound in the entire world was the mournful, beckoning hum. They rounded a bend, and the channel opened into a small, circular lagoon. The water here was unnervingly still. In the center of the lagoon, the humming was at its loudest. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Chloe swept her flashlight beam across the perimeter, illuminating the tangled roots of mangrove trees and the dark, impenetrable wall of vegetation. There was nothing. No boat, no person, no source for the sound. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the humming stopped. The silence that crashed down on them was absolute. It was a dead, vacuum-like silence that was more terrifying than the song had been. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting. "Okay, this is officially creepy," Ben said, his voice a low tremor. "Let's go back." He began to turn the canoe, and in that suffocating silence, a voice cut through the night. "Ben, I'm over here." It was Chloe's voice, crystal clear. It came from the dense tangle of mangrove roots to their right, about 20 yards away. Chloe's blood turned to ice. She wasn't over there. She was right here, in the front of the canoe, her hand clutching the side so hard her knuckles were white. She whipped her head around to look at Ben. His face, illuminated by the faint glow of the moon, was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. His paddle was frozen mid-stroke. "Ben, that wasn't me," she breathed, her own voice a strangled whisper. Before he could respond, another voice called out from the left side of the lagoon. "Chloe, where are you? Help me!" It was Ben's voice, a perfect imitation. It was filled with a convincing panic that made Chloe's heart leap into her throat, an instinctive urge to help firing in her brain before the logical part could scream, "No." But Ben was right behind her. He hadn't said a word. They were in a trap. It wasn't a person. It was a thing that had lured them out into the dark, and now it was using their own voices against them, trying to split them up, to draw one of them into the gnarled roots and black water. A low, wet chuckle echoed from the spot where Ben's voice had come from. It was a grotesque sound, full of malice. Then, from the other side, a high-pitched girlish giggle that sounded chillingly like Chloe's. That broke the spell. Pure animal terror took over. Ben dug his paddle into the water with a frantic splash, spinning the canoe around. "Go! Go! Go!" he hissed. They paddled with a desperate, sloppy energy, no longer caring about silence. They just had to get away. Behind them, the voices started again, overlapping in a sickening chorus. "Ben, don't leave me!" cried Chloe's voice. "Chloe, wait! It's a trick!" yelled Ben's voice. They were twisting their own words, turning their trust into a weapon. And then came the worst sound of all. A low, gurgling laughter began to bubble up from the water all around them, a sound that was a nightmarish fusion of both their voices, blended into one monstrous, mocking entity. They finally burst back into the clearing where their camp was. They didn't even dock the canoe properly, just crashed it onto the shore and scrambled out, falling in the mud. They looked back at the black water, their flashlight beams trembling. The swamp was silent again. The voices were gone. "We have to go," Chloe said, tears streaming down her face. "Now." There was no argument from Ben. They didn't bother with the tent or most of their gear. They grabbed their wallets, their keys, and the GPS, stuffed what they could into one backpack, and launched the canoe back into the water. They paddled back the way they came, every shadow a monster, every ripple on the water a threat. They didn't speak. The only sound was the frantic slap of their paddles against the water. It took them 2 agonizing hours to get back to the boat launch. When their feet hit the gravel of the parking lot, they both nearly collapsed with relief. They threw the wet, muddy gear in the back of their truck and drove. They didn't stop until they hit the bright, garish lights of a 24-hour gas station on the interstate. They never talked about what happened, not for weeks. It was a shared trauma, a nightmare they couldn't explain or rationalize. Ben, the man of science, had no explanation. He looked it up later. Old stories of the Luton or the Fou Follette, swamp spirits that mimic lights or sounds to lead travelers to their doom. Folklore, bedtime stories. But he'd heard it. He'd heard his own voice call out from the darkness. They live in a city now, far from any swamps. But sometimes when Chloe is home alone, she thinks she hears Ben call her name from another room. And for a split second, before she remembers he's at work, the same icy dread she felt in that lagoon washes over her. The bayou may be far away, but some voices, once heard, echo forever.
There are places in this world that are scarred. Wounds on the earth left by human industry, now abandoned and left to the slow, creeping reclamation of nature. Quarries, mines, forgotten factories. They are magnets for urban explorers and photographers, people drawn to the beauty of decay. Our final story is about one such photographer, a woman we'll call Maya. She went to an abandoned quarry looking for dramatic landscapes. What she found was the final, terrifying chapter of someone else's story, recorded on a discarded camera. And she learned that sometimes, when you find a ghost story, you've really just found the beginning of your own. Maya was a connoisseur of dereliction. Her Instagram feed was a curated gallery of rust, cracked concrete, and shattered windows. She had a knack for finding places that felt haunted by the ghosts of their former purpose. This time, her target was the old Goblin's Tooth Granite Quarry, a massive, gouged-out crater in the remote deserts of Utah. It had been shut down in the 70s after a series of accidents and financial troubles, and the local legends said it was cursed. Perfect. The drive itself was an ordeal. Miles of washboard dirt roads that threatened to shake her Jeep apart. When she finally arrived, the place was breathtaking in its desolation. It was a vast amphitheater of gray and red rock descending in sharp-edged tiers to a placid, unnaturally green pool of water at the bottom. The skeletons of old machinery, rusting conveyors, the skeletal remains of a rock crusher stood like silent metallic dinosaurs. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hot, dry wind that moaned as it swept over the lip of the quarry. She spent the first few hours in a state of creative bliss, the click and whir of her camera the only sound she made. She explored the crumbling foundations of the old processing plant, photographed the way the light hit the rust on a massive gear, and framed shots of the sheer geometric cliffs against the brilliant blue sky. It was a photographer's paradise. It was on her way down a steep, scree-covered path toward the water at the bottom that she saw it. Tucked into a thorny, desiccated bush near the base of a cliff was a flash of faded blue nylon, a backpack. It was old, sun-bleached, and covered in dust, but it was definitely a modern hiking pack. Her first thought was that someone had ditched it, but it was too far from any official trail. Curiosity, the trait that led her to all these strange places, took over. She carefully pulled it free from the thorny branches. It was heavy. She unzipped the main compartment. Inside was a standard assortment of a day hiker's gear, a high-end Nalgene bottle, still a quarter full of water,
a Ziploc bag with the remains of a crushed Cliff Bar, a compass, a folded, sweat-stained map of the area, and at the very bottom was nestled in a fleece jacket was a digital camera, a fairly nice Canon DSLR. A chill, unrelated to the desert heat, prickled Maya's skin. This wasn't ditched gear. This was a lost person's gear. She instinctively scanned the quarry walls, looking for any sign of a person, but saw nothing but rock and shadow. Her heart began to beat a little faster. She pulled the camera out. It was dusty, but seemed intact. She flicked the power switch. Nothing. The battery was dead. A wave of disappointment, mixed with a strange sense of relief, washed over her. She almost put it back. But then she remembered she had a spare battery for her own Canon in her bag. It was a long shot, but they were often interchangeable. She dug out her spare, popped open the compartment on the found camera, and slid it in. The small LCD screen flickered to life. The battery indicator showed a full charge. The screen displayed the last photo taken. It was a blurry, chaotic shot of the ground at night. Maya's hands were trembling slightly as she pressed the play button to view the gallery. There were 257 photos on the card. She started from the beginning. The first few dozen photos were of the drive, the same dirt road she had taken. Then photos of the quarry. The photographer was good. They had an eye for composition. Then the selfies began. A young man, probably in his early 20s, with a wide, infectious grin and bright, curious eyes. Let's call him Alex. He took photos of himself at the quarry's edge in front of the rusting machinery, giving a thumbs up to the camera. He looked happy, excited to be there, just like she had been an hour ago. She kept scrolling. The photos documented his descent into the quarry, following almost the exact path she had taken. There were artistic shots of the rock textures, the green water, the sky. It was a photojournal of a perfect day out. Then, around photo 150, the tone began to change. It was subtle at first. A photo taken from down in the quarry looking up the path he'd come. It wasn't framed. It felt watchful, like he'd heard something and was documenting it. A few photos later, another one, this time a close-up of a rock. Scratched into its surface was a strange symbol, a sort of spiral with 3 sharp lines radiating from the center. It looked fresh. The next few photos were back to normal landscapes, as if he had tried to shake off a feeling of unease. But the feeling returned. There was another selfie. Alex was still smiling, but it was strained now. His eyes kept darting to the edge of the frame. The sun began to set in the photos. The colors were beautiful, but the images felt increasingly lonely, increasingly tense.
Then came the first truly jarring photo. It was blurry, taken in motion. A shot of his own feet, running. The timestamp showed it was just after sunset. He was running from something. The next pictures were a chaotic sequence taken in the deepening twilight. Quick, shaky snaps of the quarry walls around him, as if he were lost or disoriented, searching for an escape route. The joy was completely gone from the images, replaced by a palpable sense of panic. Then the night photos began. They were taken with a flash, creating a stark, terrifying contrast between the brilliantly illuminated foreground and the absolute blackness beyond. Photo 234. A selfie. Alex's face filled the frame. He wasn't smiling. His face was pale, streaked with dirt and sweat. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated with fear. He was hiding,
pressed against a rock wall. Photo 235. The flash illuminated a small alcove in the rock. It looked like a place he might have been hiding. Photo 236. The strange spiral symbol again, this time scratched into the rock wall of the alcove. Maya felt sick. She was watching a man's last hours unfold in a series of silent, still images. She was sitting not 50 feet from where he had been hiding. She looked up from the camera at the deepening shadows around her. The quarry no longer felt beautiful. It felt like a tomb. She forced herself to keep scrolling. She had to know how it ended. The next dozen photos were all taken from the same hiding spot, quick, furtive snaps into the darkness. Most showed nothing but rock and scrub brush, but in one, at the very edge of the flash's reach, Maya's breath caught. There was something there. She zoomed in on the image, her fingers fumbling on the small buttons. The pixels distorted, but the shape was undeniable. It was a silhouette. It was tall, impossibly tall and thin. Its limbs were long, out of proportion, and seemed to bend at strange, unnatural angles. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person. It was just a black, jagged shape standing unnervingly still against the darkness. A goblin, for goblin's tooth. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She was looking at a picture of a monster. She scrolled to the next photo. It was another shot of the same spot. The figure was gone. The next few photos were blurry again, more running. He had been found. He was fleeing his hiding spot. There were only 2 photos left on the card. She clicked to the second to last one. Photo 256. It was another shot of the creature, but this time it was closer. Much, much closer. It wasn't a silhouette. The flash had illuminated some of its features. It had no face, just a smooth, pale expanse of skin where features should have been. Its body was emaciated, its skin stretched tight over a skeletal frame, and it was looking directly at the camera. Maya let out a small, involuntary whimper. Her hands were slick with sweat. She had to see the last one. She had to. She pressed the button. Photo 257. The final frame. It was a selfie. Taken at extreme close range, the lens distorting his features. His face was a mask of such pure, abject terror that Maya felt it like a physical blow. His mouth was open in a silent scream, his eyes wider than she thought humanly possible. But he wasn't looking at the camera. His gaze was fixed just past the lens, at whatever was standing directly in front of him, at the thing that was, perhaps, holding the camera with him. The flash illuminated his terrified face and the glistening reflection of a long, pale, 3-fingered hand on his shoulder. The screen went black. Card full. It read. Maya sat frozen, the camera clutched in her hand. The weight of what she had seen, the final, horrific moment of a stranger's life, was crushing. She slowly raised her head, her own eyes scanning the quarry that was now bathed in the long, distorted shadows of late afternoon. She was in a graveyard. Alex had died here, and the thing that killed him? She fell on the large boulder about 100 yards away near the edge of the green water, and behind it, she saw a flicker of movement. It was a sliver of pale white against the dark gray rock. It moved with a slow, deliberate motion, peeking out from behind the boulder. It was tall, impossibly tall and thin. Maya's mind screamed. It was here. It was still here. The creature from the photos was watching her. It wasn't a ghost in the machine. It was real, and it had been here this whole time, silent and patient. She didn't think, she acted. She scrambled to her feet, dropping the found camera. She didn't care. She grabbed her own backpack and ran. She clawed her way back up the scree-covered path she'd come down, her lungs burning, her legs pumping with adrenaline-fueled strength she didn't know she possessed. She didn't dare look back. She could feel its gaze on her, a cold, predatory weight. She half expected to feel a long, pale hand close on her shoulder at any moment. She reached the lip of the quarry, burst past her jeep, and just kept running down the dirt road, her mind a whirlwind of static and fear. After a few hundred yards, she forced herself to stop, fumbled for her keys, and scrambled into the driver's seat. She peeled out, sending a plume of dust into the air, her eyes locked in the rearview mirror. The road behind her was empty. She drove for an hour at reckless speeds before she finally pulled over, shaking uncontrollably. She thought about calling the police. What would she say? I found a camera with pictures of a monster that's real and lives in a quarry? They'd think she was crazy or on drugs. She never went back. She deleted her own photos from that day, trying to erase the place from her memory. But she can't erase the images from the other camera. They are burned into her brain, especially the last one, the face of pure terror, the pale hand. Sometimes she wakes up in the middle of the night, convinced that a tall, thin figure is standing in the corner of her room, just beyond the light. She'd gone to the quarry seeking the beauty of decay, but all she found was the raw, ugly face of death, and the horrifying knowledge that some monsters don't just live in stories. They wait patiently in scarred places for the next curious soul to come looking.